I used to think a creature needed both wings to fly, but then I saw an eagle, its other side torn and broken, still lifting its head toward the sky as if it had never fallen. Puzzle taught me how to stay. Shadow taught me how to trust, without needing a promise. But that summer, the storm didn't just break wings. It carried away a piece of truth that, had I known it earlier, maybe I would have never let anyone in again. The early summer breeze carried the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Willow's light stood still beneath a midday sun that felt like it was holding its breath. The willow leaves whispered, but didn't stir one another. The earth cracked dry on the surface, still damp underneath. Ellie swept the porch for the third time, even though nothing new had fallen, just to stay busy. Or maybe just to have a reason to wait for someone to walk into that quiet yard, without having to ask, "Why did you come back?" Since Caleb left, the shelter hadn't run out of work. Puzzle slept more than usual, as if reassured that everything finally had a place. Shadow limped around the yard, occasionally lifting his head toward the fence, where Caleb once fixed a hinge, then settling down again. Silent, Hope stayed the same, lying in her usual spot, watching every movement like she was the only one who knew something was about to happen. Ellie had built 3 new cages in the bird shed, one for a squirrel with a wounded tail, one for a baby sparrow that fell from its nest, and one still empty, as if something was on its way, something she couldn't yet name. The keychain Caleb left behind still hung by the front door. No one moved it. No one touched it. Once, a young volunteer pointed at it and asked, "Is that supposed to be Shadow?" Ellie just nodded. Not quite true, but not wrong either. She didn't know why she still hoped Caleb would return. Not to explain, not to start over, just to be sure he hadn't left for good. But it had been nearly 2 weeks. No sign of him, no letter, no message, only that keychain and a silence no one dared to call goodbye. Early in the afternoon, as Ellie was refilling the water basin to rinse Shadow's paws, her phone rang, an unfamiliar number from the northern mountains. A man's voice, raspy but steady. "There's an eagle, injured, fell after the storm, landed near my house. It's still alive, but it's bad. Can you come?" She looked out at the yard, where the rain still hadn't come. The wind had shifted. Then she looked toward the medical bag she always kept by the door. "Address?" she asked without hesitation. Not because she needed to save a bird, but because Ellie had come to believe everything that found its way to Willow's light always carried a piece of something that hadn't yet been named. Ellie wasn't used to asking anyone to come with her since the shelter first opened. Every long rescue trip had always been just her and Hope. But this time, when she looked over at Shadow, the dog who had once lain motionless for weeks, she couldn't leave him behind. There was something in the way he had watched her take that phone call, something in the way he stood up, even though his legs were still unsteady, that made it impossible to ask him to stay. He had once run because of someone, and now he wanted to keep going. She packed antiseptic, gauze, a handheld suture kit into her leather bag, along with a bottle of clean water and dry towels. Hope was already waiting by the truck door. Shadow climbed in slowly, settling himself behind the passenger seat, without being called. Ellie shut the door, took a deep breath, and gripped the steering wheel. The sky ahead had started to change, not storm dark, but streaked with that grayish hue like dust swept in from far away. The air wasn't hot, but it was no longer kind. Just past the third bend out of town, Ellie spotted a figure standing next to an old pickup parked on the roadside. A tilted silhouette, rolled up sleeves, backpack at his feet. She didn't need to look twice. It was Caleb, and it was just like him to show up this way. No warning, no explanation, but always exactly where she could see him. She eased off the gas, stopped, rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" she asked, her voice even. Caleb gave a slight nod. The road's slick over there. My truck couldn't make it up. Convenient. He opened the door and got in. Didn't ask where they were headed. Didn't ask why Shadow was there. Just reached into the back with a cold bottle of water for Hope and turned to look out past the trees that rustled softly in the wind. Neither of them said another word, but the bronze keychain still hung from the dashboard, swaying gently, as if it had never been removed. Ellie glanced at it. Caleb saw it too, but both of them let it be. Outside, the sky deepened. Leaves began to fall against the wind. An eagle was waiting up ahead, but so was something else. Nameless, unannounced, waiting just the same. Inside the truck, Hope lay between them, eyes unblinking. Shadow stared out the window, ears slightly pinned back, as if he could hear something. No one else could. The dirt path winding up a mountainside looked like it had just been torn apart by the storm. Fresh mud slid under the tires. Soil had caved in at the sides, and fallen branches lay across the way. Ellie brought the truck to a stop when a small wooden house came into view. Its tin roof bent the corner, but smoke still rose from a black iron chimney. A man stood on the porch, silver hair, sun-worn brown skin. He didn't greet them, didn't explain, just pointed toward the back of the house, where a moss-covered slope led to an old pine tree charred by lightning. "Fell out of the nest last night," he said. "I thought it was dead, but this morning it was still looking up. You should hurry, it's going to rain again." Ellie followed the path. Caleb walked behind her. Shadow stayed by her left side, limping. Hope trotted along the right, like two familiar satellites keeping pace. The air was thick with the scent of damp ash and wet earth. The higher they climbed, the more the wind pushed against their faces. A wordless warning. The eagle lay tilted beneath the pine, its dark feathers soaked. Dry blood spread around one wing, nearly torn beyond recognition. The other wing pressed tightly to its body, still intact. Its eyes were open, wide, dark, and staring at the world with a kind of defiance. Ellie moved slowly, didn't reach out right away. She simply knelt, lowering her head below its eye level, like asking for permission. Shadow stood a meter away, ears down, head bowed. Hope sat perfectly still. Caleb didn't come closer. He stood off to the side, fists clenched. Ellie glanced over. There was something in his eyes, not fear, not guilt, but something only someone who had once hurt a creature meant to fly could understand. "It won't fly again," the old man said from behind. "I've seen wings like that. It's gone." Ellie didn't answer. She took a step forward and pulled a clean claw from her jacket pocket. The eagle's gaze never left her, as if asking, "Are you sure you know what comes after this touch?" She set the cloth down beside it, didn't touch it, just sat there, and in that moment, while the wind carried away the scent of pine sap, the eagle didn't turn, didn't flinch. It just stared, as if to say, "I've fallen, but I'm still here." Ellie exhaled gently. "We're taking it back with us." Caleb still didn't step forward, but Hope turned to look at him, as if she knew what war he was fighting inside. Shadow took half a step back, not out of fear, but to make space. And so, for the third time, Ellie welcomed a creature that never asked to be saved, but couldn't refuse the chance to live. On the way back, the rain came without warning, not in drops, but a sheer curtain of water falling straight down, like the sky had split open. Ellie yanked the wheel hard when the tires skidded off the worn path. Caleb held on to the eagle's crate with both hands, his shirt clinging to his body, his eyes still locked on the road. Shadow shivered from the cold, while Hope never looked away from the window, as if counting each raindrop that slammed into the glass. Ellie didn't dare stop, because if she did, the way back might vanish. By the time they reached the shelter, it wasn't dark yet, but the sky had turned a dull, heavy gray. The cat enclosure's tarp had been blown off. Water flooded across the yard. carrying straw, loose chains, and broken wood. Ellie shoved the truck door open with her shoulder. Caleb carried the crate inside without needing to be told. She didn't thank him. He didn't wait for it. They set the eagle's cage near the old fireplace, under the only light bulb still flickering. Ellie toweled off Hope, then turned to check on Shadow. His back leg was swelling from the cold, but he was still trying to stay upright. "Take him inside," she said. Caleb obeyed, no questions asked. When Ellie returned, the bird shed floor was already flooded. The new cages were soaked through. She rushed out, trying to secure the tarp. The wind tore at each knot like it was snapping her fingers one by one. Caleb came running. Through the wind, he shouted, "Let me handle this, get inside." Ellie shook her head. "They can't get wet. The kittens will die." A violent gust ripped a sheet of tin from the roof. Ellie lunged forward to protect the eagle's crate. Blood from the torn wings seeped out, staining the hem of her shirt. Caleb grabbed her arm, held her back. "Sometimes you have to let it fight on its own, Ellie." She screamed back, "What would you know about fighting when one side's already broken?" The wind stopped for 2 seconds, long enough for Caleb to release her, long enough for Ellie to realize she had just said something he couldn't argue with. Caleb stepped back. Rain slid down his jaw, mixing with the scent of blood and old, damp wood. "I left someone once," he said, voice low, "because I thought I couldn't save her in time. That time, I was wrong, and I survived alone." Ellie stood still. She didn't know which part of that sentence chilled her more than the wind. Maybe it wasn't that he had once left someone, but that now, she wasn't sure. Would he leave her, too? The storm passed as quickly as it came, as if it had only arrived to see who was still strong enough to stay. By nightfall, the wind had calmed, but the ground remained soaked. Leaves had fallen in heavy clumps. The cat's shelter had tipped sideways, and the newly built roof had snapped off at the joints. Ellie used a wooden ladder to brace the frame. Her hands blistered and raw, but she said nothing. She didn't want Caleb touching it, not out of anger, but because she didn't yet know if she could look at him the same way again, or if she would always wonder what it was he once left behind, like the words he'd spoken under the rain. Caleb didn't bring it up either. He simply walked into the house, came back out with a box of nails and gloves. When Ellie returned, he was already kneeling beneath the shelter's broken roof, replacing each beam with bare hands, not rushing, not performing, and not expecting forgiveness. Inside the shelter, Hope lay still beneath the table, her head resting on her front paws. Shadow curled near the wood stove, eyes open but unmoving, as if still listening to rain that hadn't quite stopped. The eagle lay quietly in its crate. Ellie had added a layer of dry cloth, placed a bowl of water nearby. It hadn't touched anything, just kept its eyes open, those eyes still burning with a look no one wants to meet, if they've ever turned their back. When Caleb came inside, his hands covered in sawdust, he didn't approach the eagle. He stopped at the threshold of the room, where only the soft glow of a single old bulb lit the space. He sat on a low stool, his fists clenched though he held nothing. His gaze met the eagle's. Not proud, not pitying, just one soul, who once knew what it felt like to stand up when no one was waiting. Ellie stood behind the curtain. She didn't ask anything, but watching Caleb in that moment, silent, shivering from the cold, not trying to explain, she understood. Some truths don't need to be spoken. They just need not to be abandoned. An hour later, when she returned to the aviary, Caleb was still there. The eagle still hadn't slept, but for the first time, it didn't turn its head away when he stepped closer. The next morning, the ground was still damp, but the sky was clear. The scent of fresh mud mingled with the wild grass starting to grow back around the porch. Ellie sat on the front steps, a cup of hot tea in her hands, eyes fixed on the aviary that Caleb had reinforced with scrap wood. It wasn't pretty, but it held. She didn't know why she wasn't angry anymore. Maybe it was something in the way Caleb had thrown himself into each nail, each board, as if every action said more than any explanation could. A man who had once walked away from something, but now was trying his hardest not to walk away again. Around midday, Caleb came over and handed her a rough sketch, drawn on torn cardboard from an old box. I was thinking we could build a perch for the eagle. Nothing high, just enough so it can lift its head again. Ellie said nothing, but she took the drawing, and an hour later, they started sawing wood. No one assigned tasks. She held. He nailed. She measured. He cut. Hope lay a few feet away, watching like the shelter's unofficial supervisor. Shadow lay near the eagle's cage, his head resting on his front paws, ears gently perked. By late afternoon, the perch was finished, a sturdy square frame set at the edge of the yard, where morning sun would hit it directly and the breeze would pass through in the late hours. Ellie opened the cage. The eagle didn't flinch, but it didn't step out right away either. She knelt beside it, placing her hand down, but not touching. You don't have to fly, just stand. And for the first time, she gave a name. Valor. The name came out like it had been sitting in her chest, long before she ever saw the bird. Valor stepped out slowly. The broken wing stayed low, but the good one lifted slightly in the wind. It climbed onto the perch, not steady, but not collapsing either. And once it stood, its head rose high, eyes fixed on the distant tree line, not searching, just seeing. Caleb stood a few paces back, not approaching, but Ellie saw the tension ease in his gaze, not like someone afraid of being seen through, but like someone who'd finally been given permission to stop bracing. The next day, the sun rose early. No more rain, no wind, just the soft hum of insects in the brush near the fence, and the steady sound of Shadow's paws tapping across the yard in his usual loop. Ellie washed each medical tool by hand, then hung them on a fishing line strung behind the cat shelter, the kind of routine work that made everything fall back into place. By noon, she opened a notebook that listed every animal under her care. Each name was written carefully, with notes on arrival date, identifying traits, and recovery status. She flipped to a blank page and wrote, Valor, female eagle, left wing injury, cannot fly. Underneath, she added, can stand, can see, can keep going. When she closed the notebook, she placed a pen on top and leaned against the desk. The shelter hadn't changed much after the storm. The roof still leaked in the far corner. The fence still sagged in places. But inside her, something had shifted like a hinge freshly oiled. It didn't make a sound. It just opened smoother than before. Upstairs, she entered the room where an old photo of her and her father hung. The frame had yellowed from moisture, and a fine crack ran across the edge of glass like a wound that hadn't closed. She took it down, replacing it with a new wooden frame. Not larger, not fancier, just one she'd made with Caleb the week before, when they were still learning to saw wood together. The photo went back to its place, but now beneath it, a small note in Ellie's handwriting read, doesn't need to be perfect, just needs to stay. Out in the backyard, Caleb was adjusting Valor's perch, adding a thicker cloth pad so the eagle wouldn't slip when the air was damp. He didn't speak, didn't look for acknowledgement, but when he stood and glanced toward the window, he saw Ellie watching. She gave him a small nod, not forgiveness, not farewell, just enough. Hope lay stretched across the porch, eyes half closed. Shadow dozed nearby, his nose twitching in some gentle dream. The whole shelter felt like it had just survived a storm. Not the biggest, but big enough to remind everyone that what remains deserves to be handled with greater care. Ellie sat by the window, holding the shelter log in her arms. She didn't write anything new, but for the first time, she wasn't writing to remember what had passed. She was writing to continue. That bird will never fly again. I knew at the moment I touched its cold, soaked feathers and saw the part of its wing that would never be whole again. But when it stood the next morning, head lifted, eyes wide open, not searching for anything, but following the sky, I understood flight isn't everything. Just like forgiveness doesn't need an ending, it only needs the courage to move forward without looking back. Caleb never apologized. He didn't explain the missing pieces of the story, but something in the way he wiped down every wooden beam, re-patted Valor's perch, and didn't reach for me when I needed space, told me this: change doesn't always come from words. Sometimes it comes from the choice to stay, especially when leaving would have been easier. I used to think I needed someone to say, "I'm not going anywhere." But now I don't. I just need to know if someone is still standing beside me after the storm has passed. That is someone I can start to trust. Hope, as always, said nothing, but the way she looked at Caleb had shifted. No longer the gaze of a guard, more like that of a soul, used to sensing things, without needing confirmation. Shadow no longer curled into himself when he slept. He stretched out fully, as if the space around him was finally wide enough to breathe. And me, I wrote Valor's name in the shelter log, not as a wounded animal, but as a living lesson. That sometimes what we need isn't to fly, but simply to stand on ground just high enough that we no longer have to bow our heads. Letter to the future, Ellie. If one day you find yourself believing you need to be perfect in order to be kept, remember Valor, the eagle with only one wing left to stretch, who still dared to stand in the middle of the yard, head held high, eyes fixed on the sky. If you start mistaking someone's silence for distance, remember, someone once stayed through an entire season of storms, not with promises, but by simply not leaving. And if you ever forget why you started Willow's Light, go back to that little notebook, the one filled with imperfect names, all of whom still deserved a place to keep going. We don't need anyone to prove our worth. We just need the courage to stand. Ellie. Some wounds never fully heal, but they're still worth keeping. Some wounds never fully heal, but they're still worth keeping. Not to fly, but to look up. A creature with only one wing still dares to lift its head. That's not instinct. That's choice. We call that courage. Valor isn't a name for victory. It's for what survives, even after defeat. Storms don't destroy everything. They just test what's strong enough to stay. Ellie didn't need Caleb to speak the truth. She needed him to fix the roof when no one asked him to. Some apologies are made with hands, not words. Some past deserve to stay hidden until someone's ready to stop running. Not everyone who left deserves forgiveness, but those who come back and stay long enough deserve a place. Willow's light doesn't hold people with rules. It keeps them by letting them know where they belong. Shadow once ran. Now he lies beside a bird that will never fly. Hope doesn't do much, except be there, right when it matters. Maybe that's enough. Ellie didn't change her father's photo because she forgot him. She changed it because now she knows. Even a memory can learn to be still, without hurting anymore. A small wooden perch was built, not to fly, but to stand tall, to lift your head and not look down. If you've ever broken and still tried to lift your head, this episode is for you. Share a small moment when you chose to keep going. Even when everything felt broken, your story might be the reason someone who's quietly falling finds the strength to stand one more time. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to keep walking this journey with Willow's light. Every soul that stays carries something still waiting to be named.